Welcome to the BIBA Pod, where we are discussing current insurance industry challenges ahead of our conference 2023. The conference theme is Rising to the Challenge, and we'll be interviewing insurance professionals about how they personally are rising to the challenge and how we as an industry are too.
Good afternoon, Claire. I am absolutely delighted to be speaking to you today on BIBA Pod. I have been so desperate to interview you for forever, so welcome. Really nice to have you.
Thank you. Well, similarly, yeah. I mean, we should have done this, shouldn't we, quite some time ago, and then various things have conspired against us, let's say. So.
Life conspired.
Yes. It's really good to be here. Thank you.
I'm really excited about this conversation. As you know, the BIBA theme for our conference this year is Rising to the Challenge. And I've been interviewing a number of different guests about challenges in the industry, but this is a little bit different. We're talking today about personal challenges and rising to those type of challenges. And I know you have an incredible story to tell in terms of your life and how you come to be doing what you're doing. So I wonder if you might want to give us a bit of intro into who Claire Russell is.
And, you know, I never know where to start when anybody says something like that, because it's like, gosh, well, yeah, who am I? Where does it all start? I guess, you know, tying it in with this theme, I've been in the insurance industry since I left school. I started as an insurance broker when I was 16. And so that's the insurance industry connection. And I was an insurance broker for 25 years until I effectively retired as an insurance broker a little over a year ago. And I fell into the insurance industry like a lot of people do when I was a really young person, because I needed a job. I was supposed to do A-levels, and I realised within a few weeks of doing my A-levels that it wasn't for me. And I got told very firmly by my dad that I needed to get a job immediately. And so I came across a job in an insurance brokerage, and that was that. You know, I fell into insurance as a lot of people do. And that part of my life, when I started out in work, was a really challenging stage in my life for kind of personal and health reasons. When I was a teenager, when I was 13, I'd had septicemia, and the septicemia had, I was very lucky to survive it. I shouldn't have survived it. And it destroyed my right hip and part of my right femur. So from the age of 13 until I was 18, effectively I didn't have a hip. So my right hip and part of my pelvis was gone. And nobody would do any surgery until I was 18. So I had 5 years and I wasn't able to walk unaided. I had a huge chunk of my hip and my femur and my pelvis just wasn't there. And I was in excruciating pain all the time. And that was one of the reasons why I couldn't continue with my A-levels, because I was just in so much pain and trying to study, and, you know, it was just too many things. And so when I got my first job in an insurance brokerage, I was right in the middle of this time of my life where I was in horrific pain all the time. I was waiting to have a massive operation when I was 18. And so I had to be really open about that with this first brokerage that I worked for. And they were incredibly supportive. They took me on anyway. I think, recognised some talent in me from a very early stage, and they really accelerated my progression and, you know, gave me real amazing mentorship. And then when I was 18, so I've been there almost 2 years, I then had to have this huge operation to rebuild my pelvis, do a hip replacement and all sorts of other things. And then I came back to work after this massive operation, and it was like, right, now I can really get on with my career. And so I started to, you know, I came back to work and I said to my director, look, I want to have a career. Ultimately, I want to build my own business. Will you mentor me? And he said, yeah, absolutely, I will. So I'd only been back at work about 4 months, and I experienced a massive stroke, which was I mean, completely unexpected. You know, there was no kind of neurological history or anything like that. It was just something that came out of the blue, and I was in a coma for a period of time. Really, again, I shouldn't have survived it. My parents were told when it happened, were told that I probably wouldn't survive, and if I did, I would probably have quite severe brain damage. And obviously I did survive it, and I made a full recovery. I was still obviously with the same brokerage, and they supported me incredibly. And then I came back to work when I was well enough, and then really kind of, I guess, forged my career really from that point on. And by the time I was 20, I'd started my own brokerage, and I then went on to build a really successful business, and did that for lots and lots of years. And it was way down the line. I think I was, how old am I now? So it's about 8 years ago. I then had a mental breakdown, and it was having that experience that then has kind of led me into the work that I'm now doing. So it's, yeah, there's been a real theme throughout my life, really, of kind of rising to the challenge and overcoming adversity, I suppose.
Yeah, and all of the mental turmoil that goes with each of those events. So if we're talking about the stroke and the operation and years of pain, there's a mental toll that takes. So to have so young, in quick succession, some major events, and to then only 2 years later be able to set up your own business, still at a really young age. I still didn't know who I was at 20. I'm nearly 40, and I'm still wondering with that concept. So I think it's absolutely incredible. What was your driver? How did you come? I had a stroke last year.
Yeah.
And I know some of the stuff that goes with that, physical and mental. How did you find, what tools did you use? What was it that managed to get you from going back to work, still very early in your career, to having the strength and the mental clarity to start your own business?
I've thought about this a lot, and I think that I was always a very naturally resilient person. I think that that's a quality that I've always had. And I talk a lot about resilience, and I did a TEDx talk on resilience a few years ago. I think resilience is something that innately we all have as human beings, and I think some of us have more than others, and I also think it's something that can be developed, and I think those really difficult experiences that I've had, they just made me more resilient. They made me more determined, and it wasn't even a conscious thing, really. With each of those experiences, all I can remember thinking and feeling and experiencing after those was a feeling of gratitude that I was okay and that I'd survived, and even more determination to then do what I wanted to do in life. So when I went back to work after the stroke, I sat down with my director and I said, where shall I go from here? And he said, he gave me one of the best bits of advice I've ever had, actually. He said to me, words to the effect of, he said, look, get a couple more years experience here, and then go on and start thinking about how you're going to build your own business, because that's who you are. And so that's, that ultimately is what I did. And I don't remember there ever being a moment where I doubted, that I would be okay, or where I doubted that I couldn't do, or doubted that I could do the things that I wanted to do within my life.
I think that's incredible. So you said about 8 years ago you had a mental breakdown. What were the signs of that? How did you know that's what was happening?
So with the benefit of hindsight, I can see that that didn't happen overnight. I can see, if I look back, I didn't see it at the time, but with hindsight, I can see that I was ill for probably about 3 years before I had the breakdown, and that there was a cumulative effect. It was a very stressful period of my life, and the cumulative effect of that persistent stress mixed with me not acknowledging my own vulnerability, not having any self-awareness on my own behaviours and how those behaviours were contributing to my poor mental health. I think it was a cumulative effect of all of those things. So during that time, I think some people, when they're experiencing poor mental health, some people will withdraw and isolate themselves and be quieter and, all of those things. And then other people will go the other way. And I went the other way. So I was more out there, more exuberant, doing more, saying yes to everything. I was out socialising all the time. I was drinking a lot of alcohol. Alcohol was a great way for me to, or so it seemed, was a great way for me to change the way that I was feeling, and it does short term, but then you've got the consequences of that then follows afterwards. So I think the signs for me crept in really over that 3-year period, and for me they were doing more and more and more, saying yes to more and more and more, not saying no, not prioritising my well-being in any way, stopping focusing on the kind of fundamentals of health that I'd always prioritised in the past, exercise and good nutrition and, all of those things, just in the pursuit of staying busy and reaching for anything that was going to help me to change the way that I felt, which generally came in the form of alcohol.
At what point did you wake up and go, oh, this is a mental breakdown. What do I do now?
So this happened after. So when I built my business, which I sold in 2011 to the business that is now Aston Lark, was Aston Scott at the time, and I then was the Group National Operations Director for Aston Scott. Did that role for 3 years, and then I left that business, and I then went into another role, and it was during that time that I became really ill. So I was the managing director of a Birmingham-based insurance business, and I lived not very far away in Rugby, and some days I would drive into the office and some days I would get the train. Increasingly, because of the amount of alcohol I was drinking, I was getting the train into work because that meant I could go for a drink at lunchtime or go for a drink after work. I got up one morning and I have to this day no recollection of leaving the house or the journey to Birmingham. I can't remember it. I've never been able to remember it. And it wasn't because I was inebriated. I hadn't been drinking or anything like that. This is early in the morning. I left home, got on the train, went to Birmingham. And the first thing I remember is I was stood on a platform. I must have got off the train and I was then stood on a platform and I was looking at an oncoming train, and I just fleetingly had the thought, if I step in front of this train, then I won't feel like I feel anymore. And it was just literally a second that I had that thought, and it was like a massive sort of jolt went through me, and I thought, what on earth am I thinking? Why did I just have that thought? And I left the station and called somebody, and I absolutely broke down at that point. And I don't know how I got home. I think somebody took me home, and I got home and I literally collapsed on the floor in the kitchen in my house, and I just absolutely fell apart and just cried and cried and cried. And I don't then remember much for the next few days. It was like I just completely fell apart that day. And that, that's what I would describe as the moment of my breakdown.
I am absolutely sure that people listening will resonate with a number of things that you're saying. What I always struggle with, what I try to think but don't know where you would go, is where do you go from that moment? Where do you find the strength to go, I need to move forward from here? And you've mentioned a couple of things. You've mentioned the fundamentals of health. Sometimes that's really hard to put in place when you're in that place.
Yeah.
And you've also mentioned being aware and accepting your own vulnerabilities. Can you talk me through your journey from those few days at home to where you are now? Because it's an incredible journey in terms of who you are today, speaking to you today, the ability to be so open about this, but also so clearly strong as a human. So it's just incredible, and I want to know personally. So, how do you go? How do you make those changes?
Oh gosh, well, it was like I was cracked open on that day. And until that day, when I look back at it and think about what it was like until that day, I was wearing like a suit of armour all the time, and that I wouldn't let anybody in. And I hid how I was feeling. I didn't confide in anybody. I didn't ask for help. I didn't admit my own vulnerability. And it was like on that day, I was just absolutely cracked wide open. And I felt, I'd never felt so vulnerable, and I don't think I've ever felt so vulnerable since. But it made me realise that I was vulnerable and that it was okay to be vulnerable. So it all kind of poured out of me, really. And I spoke to my family, my then husband. We separated afterwards, but we were still together at the time. My closest friends. I went to see my doctor. I hadn't done any of this before. I'd kept it all inside. I went into therapy. I was diagnosed with severe depression and severe anxiety, and I was given a cocktail of medication. And it took several months to get the medication right. It took several months to find the right therapy. I went through all sorts of, I hated the first few people that I saw, all sorts of things. So it was probably an 18-month process altogether, really, for me to really get back on my feet again. And during that time, I really learned about my own triggers, my own vulnerability. I became incredibly self-aware. I learned to trust people, because I think probably one of the reasons that I'd been so closed off was that I just didn't trust anybody with any of this. And I learned that I could trust people. I started to learn about all the different kinds of help that was available. I became deeply passionate during that time about helping other people. And I think for me, helping others became a part of my recovery. And I've heard lots of people talk about that, and I've heard it described as survivor's mission. And so I became deeply passionate about helping other people. So I went and trained with the Samaritans. Probably about 6 months into that recovery time, I went and enrolled and did the Samaritans training, and then started volunteering as a listening volunteer with them. And I did that for 8 years. And then I started retraining. I retrained as a mental health first aider, a mental health trainer, a coach, a suicide awareness trainer, and a suicide intervention trainer. And when I started doing all of that, it wasn't because I had any intention to do that work or to do it as a business or anything like that. I just wanted that knowledge, and I wanted to understand how I could help myself, how I could help other people. And then I decided I was going to come back to work. And at that point, I hadn't considered leaving the insurance industry, because that's all I'd ever known, right? And so I reinvested in another insurance broking business and came back to work. And we started to bring in some of the things that I'd learned. So we trained some people as mental health first aiders, for example, and that at the time wasn't very common in the insurance industry. Not many brokers were doing that kind of thing. And then I'd been back at work a year, and then I lost my partner to suicide. And that, for me, was the catalyst for me just deciding that I was going to completely change what I did with my life. The background to what happened with him was work related. He worked in a different sector, but it was work related. And it was like for me, I just felt, right, I'm really being shown that I've got to be a part of this somehow. I've got to be a part of change. And so later on, not long after, a few months later, I started the business that I now run, which is Mental Health in Business. And yeah, the rest, as they say, is history, really.
I'm completely in awe, Claire. There are many, many people who struggle day-to-day lives for a number of reasons that haven't faced the levels of adversity that you have. But I think your story is a really powerful, what's the word I'm looking for, kind of lesson or way of showing somebody that you can come back from really extreme adversity. What would you say your kind of overarching lesson would be, or rule, or you know, when somebody's in that place, what picked you up after all of these? What's the one thing, if you can pick one thing that maybe is the foundation for you to build on? I'll tell you where I'm thinking. So you've had a mental breakdown and you are still in the recovery for that, and then you lose your partner. That's hard. That's hard anyway. What was it that allowed your recovery to continue and allowed you to build something incredible for the world?
Finding a purpose in those experiences. I think simply it was that. You know, I remember in the days after my partner died, I was pregnant when he passed away, and I lost the baby about a month after he died. And a few days after that, I remember sitting on my bedroom floor, just lying on my bedroom floor, absolutely in bits. And I just remember having this moment where I realised that I was going to have to make a choice between this destroying me or finding a purpose in all of it. And it was a purposeful choice. You know, I decided that I would find purpose in it, and that I would create something that was good out of it, and something that would help and benefit other people, so that hopefully fewer people would experience what I was experiencing.
Tell me a little bit about mental health in business, because I don't know many businesses that have come out of such a strong purpose. How do you go about what you do in mental health and business?
So it was an interesting process of deciding what it actually was that I was going to do, because I'd done all of this training. Obviously, I'd had my lived experiences of my mental breakdown. I'd had, you know, the lived experience of losing my partner to suicide and everything around those experiences. And I remember sitting there and thinking, right, okay, I'm clear that I need to somehow find purpose in all of this. That's really clear to me. And I've got over 20 years business ownership and leadership experience. I've, you know, loads and loads of connections, particularly in the insurance industry. I've got all of this training that I've done. I've got all of these lived experiences. How do I somehow bring those things together to benefit others? And what I realised was that, you know, my own experiences had shown me that there was a real problem in terms of how mental health is addressed within the workplace. So I thought, right, so what can I do about that? And I'd qualified as a coach some time before, and initially I was thinking, well, maybe my work will be one-to-one coaching, and I thought, well, actually, I want to reach as many people as I can. So if we work with large organisations, then that's going to allow us to reach thousands of people, way more than I can if I work one-to-one with people. And so that's where the idea was born. I started the business. I convinced a couple of people to come on the journey with me. I knew a lot of people in the insurance industry, so it was the obvious place for us to start. So I went out and spoke to lots of my connections in the industry and said, look, this is what we're going to be doing. We'll be providing all of this different kind of training all around mental health in the workplace. Will you work with us? And so that's what we did. And our business has evolved hugely over the last 5 years because, of course, we've had the pandemic. So, gosh, we started the business, we created all of this stuff. We became accredited by all of these various different providers in order to deliver workplace mental health first aid training, workplace suicide awareness, suicide intervention training. They're all kind of accredited trainings. And then the pandemic hit, and all of those kind of trainings pre-pandemic, they were all delivered in person. We weren't even allowed to deliver them online. The accreditation, the accredited bodies for whom we were delivering it, they wouldn't let us deliver them in person. So, we'd done all this work to get this business off the ground, and then the pandemic hit, and everything stopped. And it was terrifying because I'd put my everything into the business at that point, everything that I had, emotionally, my heart and soul, everything that I had financially. And then it all just stopped. And I did question whether we'd survive it, but actually it proved we're a better business for it because we were able to evolve out of it and actually now what we have and what we can provide businesses is so much broader and deeper and more extensive, and it forced us to grow and adapt in ways that we hadn't anticipated pre-pandemic.
Amazing. So we've all read all of the books, Miracle Monday, wake up at 4 o'clock, drink 2 pints of water, do a 10-mile run, 15 squats, and then 2 hours of work, and this is how you build a successful business, and then this is how you're successful and healthy, and it doesn't work because I'm not a robot and I've tried it and I cannot maintain that level of something. I'm coming to the conclusion that it's all about balance and it's all about low-level consistency. But even that I struggle with sometimes because I'm not a naturally balanced person. I'm quite extreme in the way I view things. And I'm interested in what you said about doing more. The harder life is doing more, because I do that. What kind of routines or structures have you got in place now? What do you, to maintain that level of balance and consistency in mental well-being for you whilst running a successful business that is supporting people? How do you do it?
Wow, great question. So, look, I'd love to be able to say that I get up at 5 every morning and I do my morning meditation and I do my journaling and I don't. I've been through phases where I've done that kind of stuff consistently, and actually what I've learned is that what I need to do more than have those kind of consistent routines in place is I need to be able to listen to what my body is telling me. And so, some days it makes sense to me to get up really early and to do all of those kind of things. And then other days it makes more sense to me to stay in bed a while longer and take it easy and give myself an easier day of it. So what is absolutely non-negotiable for me is that at the beginning of the week, I look at the week ahead and I factor in, or even I'll do it a month in advance, I'll factor in the time that is for my self-care every day, every week. Now, some days that will be 10 minutes where I'll literally lie on my bed and stare at the ceiling for 10 minutes. I've got 2 teenagers and I have a sign that I put on the bedroom door that says, "Do not disturb unless you're bringing me tea and chocolate." And so the kids know if that sign's on my door, then they're not allowed to disturb me, and quite regularly they'll open the door quietly and they'll tiptoe across the room with a cup of tea and just put it on my bedside table and then leave again. The non-negotiable for me is factoring in time for self-care every day, consistently, week in, week out. Now, some people, when you talk about self-care, their eyes start rolling and they start, I think the ideas around self-care have been sort of convoluted and perhaps made into something else. But, for me, when I'm talking about self-care, what I'm talking about is whatever it is you need to do for yourself to give yourself the energy and the vitality to meet the daily demands of your life. Now, for me, self-care 10 years ago used to be going to the gym and weight training 6 days a week. Now, that's not what my body needs. Now what my body needs is time on my own every day, even if it's just 10 minutes, getting out for a walk every day, or, maybe going to the gym once or twice a week, going and doing a weekly yoga class, and I think our needs change, the things that we need to do for ourselves in order to have the energy that we need and to feel well. It changes, it ebbs and flows. And I'm noticing for myself, I suspect I'm perimenopausal, and I'm noticing for myself that I don't have quite as much energy as I used to have. By no means am I saying that I'm slipping into old age or anything like that, but my energy levels are different, and the things that I need to do to feel good are different from the things that I needed to do to feel good 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It's just different stuff. I'm definitely noticing signs of perimenopause. I'm definitely noticing that I need different stuff. So I think as we go through life, what self-care means for us is going to be different at different stages, or there's biological factors that are impacting on us, there's environmental factors that are impacting on our mind and our body. So having self-awareness around all of that stuff is important, and being intentional about that self-care, whatever it is, whether it is just factoring in 10 minutes of alone time every day, or running a half marathon if that really floats your boat, but being intentional in doing that.
Let me sum up what I have learned from you during this conversation, because I think it's really powerful. The first thing is that resilience is critical and it can be built. There are things you can do. There are ways you can build your own resilience. I think that's really important. The second thing is being aware of your own vulnerabilities. And I like what you said about building in time for you to really listen to your body. And I did speak to somebody recently who I think is fabulous, and she talks about your head, your thinking space, your emotion space, and your gut. And sometimes you need to come down into the gut to really understand what's going on. I think that's much harder to do than it sounds, and I think it requires practice. So I love the just building in some time for yourself to listen to your body. And I think profoundly, there's always hope, there's always someone, there's always something you can do, people that you can speak to, and being able to trust those people. So I think those would be my key takeaways from what you've talked about today. Is there anything you think I've missed, or any points that you'd really like to emphasize for those people listening?
No, gosh, if you'd have asked me what those 3 key points or takeaways were should be, they would have been absolutely what you just said. So it's incredible that you have kind of pulled out those threads in the way that you have. I think the piece, so 2 points to emphasize, resilience is absolutely the foundation of physical and mental and emotional health and well-being. It can feel like, when things are really bad, it can feel like we don't have resilience. So I do some one-to-one coaching, and I'm working with a guy at the moment who, when he first started working with me, he said, I don't have any resilience, and that's the thing that I want to work with you on. I want you to help me to build some resilience. And I was like, well, the good news is that you're wrong. And, you do have resilience. It's there. It's innate. You're born with it. It's who you are. It's who we all are. But sometimes that gets lost. We lose sight of it. There are things that all of us can do to nurture that and to feed it and to grow it and to make it greater. And then the other thing that I wanted to just emphasize is it ties in with that last point about hope. Hope it's absolutely essential for anyone that's going through anything, is to have hope that things can get better and will get better. And when you're in it, that can seem impossible. I can remember in my darkest days and darkest moments finding it really, really difficult to find that. And the best way that I could find to do that at that point was to just find the smallest things to be grateful for. The smallest things, whether it was just a beautiful sunrise or a nice cup of tea in the morning when it was quiet and nobody else was up, or, just the smallest of things. And actually, it can grow from there. You don't have to. When things are really tough and things are really dark, it can be super difficult to start figuring out how you're going to claw your way out of that and to try and see the big things. But, if you can just focus in on those small moments, those small things to be grateful for, then it's something to grow from, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think that's beautiful, Claire. I have really enjoyed this conversation, and I am so grateful to you for your openness and your honesty and your learnings that you're sharing with the world. So thank you.
You're very welcome. I think you and I could probably literally spend all day, couldn't we?
I think so. Absolutely. No, I'm hoping, what I'd like probably to do is, I don't know if you've got any resources around resilience that we'd be able to include in the show notes. So anybody listening will be able to have I don't know if you've got any of that kind of stuff that we could include, that you might be able to send over to Bex. I think that would be fabulous, and places to go. So thank you.
Yes, I do. I have a resilience, PDF all on resilience, and it's got some resources and stuff like that within that. So I'll be really happy to share that.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to hear more, click the subscribe button on your chosen streaming platform and follow us on our socials, including YouTube. We hope to see you at the conference in Manchester on the 10th and the 11th of May. And if you have any questions at all, you can find out where to contact us on thebibaconference.org.uk/contact.